All right, everybody, we're here with PR to talk about his current class. So, what is the title and big picture or main point of your current equipped class?
So we are doing the New Testament survey course. So we're looking at the big picture of the Bible, helping us understand who is God, what's He doing, how does that apply to our daily lives. Of course, all of history really centers on Christ and the cross. The Old Testament looks towards the cross, and the New Testament looks back to the cross. But then the question is, how do we find salvation in Christ, and how do we live our lives accordingly?
So, how does that teach us about who God is?
Well, like for example, in the Gospels, we see Christ, incarnate, and so that helps us to see, what is God like. The rest of the epistles in the New Testament really, in light of the cross, in light of this new relationship we can have because of what Jesus Christ has accomplished on the cross, it helps us to say, okay, this is how we're to live our lives. And obviously, our lives are to be lived as a demonstration of who God is. In other words, God's trying to instill His character in us to make us more like Christ. And so we need to understand, okay, what does that mean? What does that look like? And then the epistles unpack, really, the New Testament epistles really unpack that.
Okay. So, is there something that you've gone over with class material or information that made you dig a little bit deeper before you were willing to talk about with everybody on Sunday?
Yeah, well, the fun thing for me with this study, I mean, we're doing New Testament now, but we did the Old Testament before. And being able to see the intentionality of God in the Old Testament that helped point to Jesus was really fun for me. For example, and we see this in the New Testament in the designation for the Son of Man. We typically think, okay, that sounds like a designation that, Jesus is referring to himself in more of a humble way. But the reality is, it goes back to a prophecy in Daniel chapter 7, where Jesus is identifying himself with the Son of Man in that passage. The Jews would have understood that to be speaking about the everlasting kingdom and the one who had a divine authority when he talked about the Son of Man. That designation also was used 93 different times in Ezekiel, and it refers to the suffering servant. So we see both. The Son of Man refers to this divine one with authority, and also the suffering servant. And so that was interesting for me, to be refreshed and be reminded of that, but that Jesus is both God and the suffering servant. And the Old Testament saints, they didn't understand. They didn't understand that, and even in the New Testament, that was confused by the Jews. So.
Okay. Yeah, so you think that people, I mean, when you had that class, like talking about that they were very as surprised as you that it was so hard to
Well,
grasp that
I
idea?
think without having probably studied it further, that just the way our ears would hear, Son of Man, it sounds like that's a designation for more of his humility. But the way the Jews would have understood that prophecy would have been to understand it more as like, no, he's the divine one who's identified with Daniel 7. So I think that was cool for me, to have to study that out some more, make sure that I fully understand it. But I think it's one of those things that we probably don't fully understand, because of the way we would read that in our current, understanding of those words.
Yeah, that's cool. So do you feel challenged or encouraged by what you've learned during this class that you're hoping to carry into your New Testament part two?
Well, yeah, I really have enjoyed the curriculum. The curriculum again, like the Old Testament, just helping to see, where do we see Jesus, and how does that point out, and of course the New Testament. I think the thing that I would love for our students to walk away with is to be able to see the big picture of the different books of the Bible, for a couple of reasons. One of the goals is, so that helps them with their own personal study. One of them helps them is like when they're coming with, they have a question about something in the Bible. They have an idea. Okay, oh yeah, that would probably be in the Gospel of Mark, for example. Because Jesus is the King, or if it has to do with Jesus and his humanity, maybe that's the Gospel of Luke, because Luke was a doctor and he wrote more about the humanity of Christ, or maybe, okay, I have questions about church leadership. Well, then I go to the pastoral epistles and First and Second Timothy and Titus. So I just would love for people to be able to have an educated guess, when they think of the scriptures, because we've done this New Testament survey.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I guess I would have never thought of it that way. So that's very interesting. So I guess I've kind of already spilled the beans that New Testament part two is coming next. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I mean, so far we have gotten, we did First Timothy, and then we will pick it up the second half and finish out the rest of the New Testament. Will be what we'll be doing starting in January.
All right, cool. Well, awesome. Thank you for letting me ask some questions.
Absolutely, thank you.